Okay.
I'm going to start laughing.
It's okay.
Alright, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 She turned to look at him. I'm gonna start laughing. She turned to look at him. She hadn't expected this answer, and she began to wonder why she even got out of bed to talk to him at all. Over it? Right. Me too. She could feel his eyes on her for an instant before turning away again, hearing him mutter, completely over it, underneath his breath. I read that wrong, but anyway.
That's okay.
She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, her gaze firmly planted on the coffee table in front of her. It was a long time ago. Matt looked up at her, biting his lip. 3 years. Oh my god. Okay, anyway. Matt looked up at her, biting his lip. 3 years. His mind was reeling. Hadn't he gotten over everything that happened between them? He constantly reminded himself that he had, but it seemed as if his heart no longer worked together with his brain. After a moment, Ellie looked up as well. I doubt anybody even remembers. Matt nodded, clearing his throat. Hell, I've practically forgotten that anything... okay. Matt nodded, clearing his throat. Hell, I've practically forgotten that anything ever happened between us. She looked over at him, trying not to look hurt. So it wasn't that memorable for you? He shook his head, looking over at her. I didn't say that. Why? Was it memorable for you? Maybe, she grinned slowly, continuing. What would you do if I said yes? Then I'd know that I wasn't alone. She moved towards him, inconspicuously clearing her throat. Well, that puts us in quite the precarious position. Matt's breath caught in his throat as he slid towards her as well, his pulse pounding loudly in his ears. Indeed, it was. But what do you propose we do? She looked up at him, a vague smile on her lips. That was freaky.
Don't break up now. There's so much more.
I know. I'll be okay. Oh my god. Okay, anyway. It is Christmas. It is, mind you, is in italics. It is Christmas, and we're two able-bodied people. Surely we can think of something. Oh wait, was that his line? Oh. Okay. It is Christmas, and we're two able-bodied people. Surely we can think of something. He glanced around the room, his mind reeling. She watched him intently for a few moments before closing the gap between them, resting a hand on his cheek. Okay, hold on. I gotta take this out.
Okay, this is actually behind you.
Oh, well, I'm going to chew it later. Okay. She watched him intently for a few moments before closing the gap between them, resting a hand on his cheek and turning his face to look at her. She sat up slightly, their lips connected with a kind of soft fierceness, both seeming to be holding back for fear of what might happen. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her to his body. He had forgotten just how much he had missed this the past 3 years. His mind drifted back to the shrieking shack as he pulled away slightly to look at her, finding it harder and harder to breathe properly. She looked into his eyes, a mixture of Christmas lights and dim moonlight reflecting in them, casting enticing shadows across his face. She grinned and kissed him again, her eyes closing. Matt broke away for a moment. I got lost. Matt broke away for a moment, trailing kisses across her jawline before stopping at the nape of her neck. His touch hot against her skin. He kissed her again, his arms tracing circles across her back. What was bad about being over it? I lied. She sighed. She sighed into his lips. I thought that said hips. Okay. I lied, she sighed into his lips, pulling away to look into his eyes. Grinning, she straddled his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. So sue me. He lifted a hand, brushing a bit of hair from her face. Even in the darkness, he could see that something wasn't right. His eyes trailed across her cheek before looking into her eyes.
Oh, stop. Pause. Okay, I'm explaining this. Like I said earlier, she's in an abusive relationship, and she has a bruise on her cheek, and that's how, like, people are noticing.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Okay. She shook her head and looked away, her hair falling back into her face. It's nothing. Gently, he turned her face back towards him, brushing away the strands again and leaning forward. He kissed the bruise on her cheek softly, as if reassuring her that he understood. He traced a thumb across the surface of her cheek for a moment before pulling her back to him, looking into her eyes. It happened in an instant. One moment, the house was silent. I think this is supposed to say safe, but instead, save for their steady breathing and the soft flicker of the Christmas lights. And the next, they were falling onto the couch, both struggling to grab as many articles of clothing as they could find and pull them off. Seconds turned into agonizing minutes until finally, a pile of clothes materialized on the floor. Fighting to catch his breath was a losing battle as he took Ellie's hand in his and kissed it softly. His hair was drenched and his heart threatened to wake the entire house. She combed his hair back with her fingers. Her other hand braced on his back as he slowly slipped inside of her. She arched into him, taking in all that he had to offer, before wrapping her legs around his waist, resting her forehead on his shoulder. He picked up a gentle rhythm, his hands finding support on the edge of the couch.
Her couch.
She pulled him down. Who's this guy? Oh, never mind. She pulled him down tighter, causing him to push into her roughly. She bit her lip and rested her head back against the pillows, closing her eyes tightly. She could feel a powerful release welling up inside of her, but she wanted to prolong it as much as she could. Matt trailed his hands down her sides to her stomach before resting them on her hips. His breath became ragged as he again picked up his rhythm. He leaned down and kissed her softly, biting her lip as he pulled away. Yeah. She opened her eyes and looked up at him, her arms wrapped around his neck. She met his pace until finally she felt the familiar current ripping through her, though now it was different. More relief and pleasure than lust. She opened her mouth to cry out, but Matt quickly pressed his lips against hers, muffling her. She sunk down into the cushion as he found his release, thrusting into her as he fed back a moan. As the pang subsided, he lay down on top of her, a hand cupping her cheek. Her thoughts were swimming. Had she really cheated on her boyfriend? Was it worth it? Her eyes met hers before she pulled his head down and kissed him softly, all negative thoughts leaving her mind instantly. The first traces of sunlight had already lit the room before they silently crept back upstairs. Ellie glanced towards Matt fleetingly before stepping into her room and closing the door behind her. It took Matt a few moments to return to his own room. His mind was still in overload on what had happened. Slowly, he closed the door behind him, knowing that whatever hope he had to forget about Ellie and to move on with his life had somehow erased itself, replaced with something that he wasn't quite sure that he was willing to admit yet. Oh my god.
So guess what happened after that?
They died.
She got pregnant.
Oh my god. How do you stop this thing?
You press stop.
Stop.